What happens when a global superpower decides to weaponize food? What happens when decades of trust between American farmers and one of their biggest customers suddenly collapse? Right now, U.S. soybean farmers are staring down a crisis that feels uncomfortably familiar to the dark days of the 1980s farm collapse. And at the center of it all, China tariffs and politics that have put rural America directly in the crossfire. Stay with me, because today we re-diving deep into how a trade war has turned soybeans into a geopolitical weapon, and what this means not just for farmers, but for the global balance of power. Before we talk about the crisis, let's understand why soybeans are such a big deal. Soybeans are not just another crop. They're a $60 billion cornerstone of U.S. agriculture. Roughly 1/3 of America's soybean exports used to go to China, making Beijing the single most important customer for us farmers. Soybeans aren't just tofu or soy sauce. They're used in animal feed, cooking oil, and even biodiesel. In short, soybeans are food security, energy, and economics rolled into one little bean. And when China said no thanks to American soy, the shockwaves didn't stop in Iowa. They rippled across the entire global supply chain. So, how did we get here? It started with tariffs. The U.S. government slapped tariffs on Chinese imports to pressure Beijing on trade practices, intellectual property, and manufacturing. China, of course, retaliated. And instead of targeting Wall Street or big tech, they aimed right at the heartland American farmers. Why? Because farmers were a political base for the very leaders who imposed those tariffs. By cutting off soybean imports, China didn't just send an economic message, it sent a political one. For decades, China bought 60% of Iowa's soybeans, almost overnight. That demand vanished. Farmers who had invested their lives, their land, and their savings suddenly had no buyer. Let's talk about Warren Bachman, a farmer in Iowa who's been working his land for over 6 decades. He grew soybeans year after year, confident there would always be a market. But now, as he harvests his crop, he says he can hardly give it away. Prices have fallen so low that many farmers are facing bankruptcy. And here's the painful irony. Bachman voted for the very policies that triggered these tariffs. He supported President Trump, believing those policies would protect American industry. But now, his own livelihood is at risk. This is not just Warren's story. Across Iowa, Arkansas, and the Midwest, farmers who once proudly backed tariffs are now struggling to keep their farms afloat. Older farmers remember this feeling all too well. In the 1980s farm crisis, thousands lost their land to foreclosure. Rural communities collapsed. Families who had farmed for generations were forced to walk away. Now, many say history is repeating itself. Input costs like fertilizer, machinery, and fuel are at record highs, while crop prices have plunged. And when you add crushing debt into the mix, the math doesn't work. As Bachman put it, there won't be a farmer left in 5 years if things don't change. So, what does Washington say? President Trump argues that tariffs are a long-term play. He claims farmers will eventually benefit once China feels enough pressure to come back to the table. In the meantime, he promises subsidies and relief payments from tariff revenues. But here's the problem. Farmers don't live on eventually. They live on yearly harvests, on bills due today, on loans that can't wait, and relief checks. Many farmers see them as handouts that don't solve the root problem, the loss of a stable, reliable market. Meanwhile, critics, including some Republicans like Senator Charles Grassley of Iowa, are calling this policy a stupid mistake that punishes America's own farmers while leaving competitors like Brazil and Argentina to seize the Chinese market. Let's zoom out, because this isn't just an Iowa story, it's global. Brazil and Argentina are now supplying China with soybeans once bought from the U.S. China diversifies suppliers, reducing its dependence on America and strengthening ties in South America. Once China establishes these new trade routes, they may never come back to U.S. soy. In other words, a temporary trade war could cause a permanent realignment of global agriculture. And that means America risks losing not just billions in exports, but its long-term leverage in global food markets. Now, here's where things get even more interesting. Iowa, a state that helped elect Trump, is feeling the sting hardest. With midterm elections around the corner, struggling farmers could shift the political balance. Senator Joni Ernst has already announced she won't run again, sensing the anger brewing in her state. And Democrats are making the case that these policies are destroying rural America. The big question, will farmers stick with the politicians who triggered this crisis, or will they demand change at the ballot box? So, what's the future? Short-term pain, farmers will keep struggling unless new markets are found for soybeans such as biodiesel within the U.S. or exports to Europe. Global realignment, China continues building stronger ties with South America, making U.S. soybeans less essential. Political consequences, rural voters could reshape the 2026 elections depending on whether they continue to feel betrayed or find relief. The reality is this: food is now a weapon in the global power struggle between Washington and Beijing. And once food becomes a weapon, ordinary people, farmers, workers, families end up as collateral damage. So, what do you think? Should the U.S. continue tariffs even if farmers are paying the price? Or should Washington back down to protect American agriculture, even if it means losing leverage against China? Drop your thoughts in the comments side. Love to hear your perspective. If you found this breakdown useful, don't forget to hit like. Share this video with someone who needs to understand the stakes. And of course, subscribe for more global and geopolitical news explained clearly. Because in a world where trade wars can destroy livelihoods, staying informed is not just important, it's survival. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.